Hey, this is Pastor Bunjee Garrett, and I want to take some time today to present you with another word of encouragement. Well, just in case you haven't heard, you might like to know that Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, he just ordered the conscription of over 135,000 men by the end of 2025. According to the reports, Russian authorities plan to call up at least 135,000 men from the ages of 18 to 30 for compulsory military service, which makes this the largest conscription drive in 9 years. That being the case, I can't help but to wonder, is this a response to the moves currently being made by the US and NATO? Now, just to be clear about this, I want to consider an article that Michael Snyder just published titled 9 Signs That the United States and NATO Are Both Preparing for War. At the top of this list, we learn that Keith Kellogg, he serves as our special envoy for Ukraine and Russia. He recently told Fox News that President Trump has given Ukraine the authorization to conduct long-range missile strikes deep inside Russian territory. If Kellogg is correct about his report, and there's no reason to think that he's not, well, it only stands to reason then that Ukraine is preparing to conduct long-range missile strikes with missiles being supplied by the US. Now, this brings us to the second sign on Michael Snyder's list, which is based on the report that the Pentagon is now asking firms that produce missiles for the U.S. military to double or even quadruple their production rates. That's right, according to the Wall Street Journal, the Pentagon is urging its missile suppliers to double and even quadruple production rates on a breakneck schedule. And Snyder also points out that the push to speed production of the critical weapons in the highest demand has played out through a series of high-level meetings between Pentagon leaders and senior representatives from several U.S. missile makers. Deputy Defense Secretary Steve Feinberg is taking an unusually hands-on role in the effort, which has been called the Munitions Acceleration Council. The third sign on Michael Snyder's list is based on the evidence that the U.S. is strongly considering sending long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. According to the reports, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has acknowledged that the White House is actively considering proposals to sell Tomahawk missiles to European allies for the use in Ukraine. It was actually just on Sunday when Vice President Vance, he informed Fox News that the Trump administration is looking at sending long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine as Washington seeks to ramp up pressure on Moscow to come to the negotiating table and come to a peace agreement to end the bloody conflict happening over there. And Vance not only confirmed that these Tomahawk cruise missiles are a very serious threat to the city of Moscow, but also expected Vladimir Putin to address this threat during a major speech that's scheduled to be delivered this week. A spokesman from the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, he dropped a cryptic message in an interview by Sunday, and he did this by declaring this, and I quote him here, "The president will deliver a fairly major speech next week. We will announce what it will be about, as well as exactly when and where, but the week will be interesting." With this in mind, I have no doubt that this is the reason for Putin's decision to now call up 135,000 new soldiers for the Russian military. The fourth sign that Michael Snyder presents as evidence that the United States and NATO are preparing for war, well, it's based on the fact that Denmark has suddenly called up hundreds of reservists. As a matter of fact, it was Sunday, September 28th. That's when reservists in Denmark were urgently called up for service, and according to the reports, there were incidents involving unidentified drones that triggered this decision, and as a result, soldiers have now been instructed to report as quickly as possible in order to prepare for their possible deployment within Denmark. The fifth sign on Michael Snyder's list that helps us to see that the United States and NATO are preparing for war, well, it's based on the fact that NATO forces in the Baltic Sea are in a state of enhanced vigilance. A spokesperson for NATO said it has enhanced vigilance in the Baltic Sea following the intrusions. And according to the reports, the reinforced measures include multiple intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms, and at least one air defense frigate in the region to the west of Russia. The sixth sign on Michael Snyder's list here that helps us to see that the U.S. and NATO are preparing for war, well, it's that French hospitals have now been instructed to prepare for mass casualties by March 2026. So according to these reports here, French hospitals have been told to prepare for a major military engagement by March 2026. And the newspaper here warns that between 10,000 and 50,000 men could be expected in hospitals over a period of 10 to 180 days. With that being the case, there's no doubt in my mind that NATO is preparing to engage with Russia in defense of Ukraine. The seventh sign on Michael Snyder's list, which helps us to see that the U.S. and NATO are both preparing for war, was based on the fact that Germany is also preparing to treat up to 1,000 wounded troops per day. Germany's armed forces are now planning how to treat a potential 1,000 wounded troops per day in the event that a large-scale conflict between NATO and Russia should break out. It should be noted that Moscow has rejected any suggestions that it might be preparing for a war with the Western military alliance, but the latest incursions of Russian jets and drones into NATO territory have raised fears of escalation. Germany's Surgeon General said the number of wounded troops in a potential conflict would depend on the intensity of battle and which military units are involved. The eighth sign on Michael Snyder's list, it helps us to see that the U.S. and NATO are preparing for war, and this is based on the fact that President Trump, the Secretary of War, and every general and admiral in our military are currently gathered together at a military base in Virginia for an unprecedented all-hands meeting of U.S. military commanders. President Trump assures us that the purpose of this meeting is celebratory, and he did this by declaring this, and I quote, "It's really just a very nice meeting, talking about how well we're doing militarily, talking about being in great shape, talking about a lot of good, positive things. It's just a good message." Meanwhile, many others are speculating about the real reason for why all of our generals and officers and admirals from around the world are summoned to this meeting, and I can't help but to wonder if this meeting has anything to do with the situation unfolding there in Ukraine. The ninth and final sign on Michael Snyder's list is based on the fact that a fleet of U.S. tankers just made the long journey across the Atlantic Ocean, and Donald, as Donald Trump is actually meeting today with generals and admirals from our military, this fleet of U.S. air tankers is arriving at a major Air Force base in England. In order to grasp the gravity of this report, it'll help you to know that the last time we witnessed a deployment of tankers of this magnitude was 5 days before American warplanes struck Iran's nuclear facilities. With that being the case, I can't help but to wonder, is the U.S. about to work with NATO to attack Russia? I should also remind you that it was just yesterday when President Trump met with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House. And it was during that time when Trump presented the Gaza peace plan. And while several Israeli officials and world leaders have welcomed the Gaza peace plan, I can't help but to wonder how all of this might play into the end-time events, which includes a peace treaty that ends up being enforced by the Antichrist. I should remind you about the warning that Paul presented in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Beginning at verse 1, he declares, "Concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape." Think about that for a moment. According to Paul, there's going to come a point in time when the rulers of this world are promising peace and safety, but then sudden destruction comes upon them, like the labor pains upon a pregnant woman. And as we consider how President Trump's peace plan is widely being embraced as he's meeting with all of our military leaders there in Virginia, I can't help but to wonder, will this peace plan give way to the sudden destruction that Paul was referring to here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5? Thankfully, for those who trust in Jesus Christ, we're going to be spared from the tribulation that will eventually come upon this world. Here's how Paul put it. It's in the very next verse where he declares, "But you, brethren, are not in darkness, so that this day should overtake you as a thief." Christian, listen, we can rejoice in knowing that the day of the Lord will not overtake us like a thief in the night. And with that being the case, I encourage every Christian to stand strong in our faith. Let's stand strong by faith in Jesus Christ as we continue to fight the good fight of faith, and all for the glory of God.